Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all delegations. Intoki heun siikason. Ikiwi kauyan. Tanikanista moogik ntotemak. Inuak. Eksnanaskamun stahe. Ikuitsim kauyan anot kakakaisis mo anapsis. No ako maganagota. Holding a shon inigan tatam skog. Inanaskomak ngeton. Thank you very much and good afternoon to all delegations. I want to thank at the outset our brothers and sisters from the Haudenosaunee for welcoming us as they always do and allowing us into their traditional territory. Thank also to the United Nations, the Permanent Forum, the Secretariat, and all those involved with gathering us here on this very, very important and historic day. Colleagues, I've been asked to give a traditional welcome invocation. So with your permission, I will do it in my language. Amamoitamak se manto. Asemina pego. Inanaskamoyan stahingeton. Iswasaka meptsigota hisinok kahkyo. Aswaim. Soaim. Mistaki goya matse. Epe mamopia ngeton. Eksuneoya gotse. Neoyak. Ninanaskomon. 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 I just bring you greetings in my language to acknowledge all of your excellencies. As I say, to offer thanksgiving to our Creator, however you acknowledge Creator for all the blessings we've received. Thanksgiving for all those brave warriors who went in front of us to help us, whether they were members of states, whether they were from different staffs, Indigenous leaders, elders. Also, I want to pay very special tribute for those that have gone on to the spirit journey these past couple of years. Also to thank people who are sometimes last to be acknowledged. I want to acknowledge them as well, the staff members here, the interpreters who, without your help over these 10 years and before that 30 years, not have been able to understand each other. So I thank you for that. So for those of the past that we honor and remember, and those of you and us present here today, with your permission, I would like to offer as an opening an honor song for all of those we all remember. Anota, egananto tebin. Ewi. Gamustamog ngeton nuitsewaganak. Ya hey 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 ya hey hi oh hey hey hi oh hey oh hey oh hey no tak semanto naskomanan stay no ta. Hinamaunan, kueskita toskata mahko manota, atuskeun. Ja ei, ja ei, hi, oh hey, hi, oh hey, oh hey, oh hey, hey, no tak semanto. Thank you.
I thank Grand Chief Wilton Littlechild for the traditional welcome ceremony for the 2017 commemoration of the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. Distinguished Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Liu, Chair of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Madame Mariam Wallet Abubakrine, Excellencies, representatives of member states, indigenous peoples, the UN system, the civil society, and allow me also to thank the team led by Madame Chandra Roy, chair, managing the Permanent Forum of the Secretariat that serves the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues. In the division, I have the honor to lead the Division for Social Policy and Development. I'm really honored to moderate the high-level segment of the observance of the United Nations International Day of World's Indigenous Peoples. This is a very special occasion as we commemorate the 10th anniversary since the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that was established in 2007, 10 years since then. This event is organized, as I said, by the Division for Social Policy and Development, where the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum is established together with the United Nations Department of Public Information. And now I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Liu, the newly appointed Undersecretary General for the Economic and Social Affairs Department, to deliver his remarks for the commemoration of this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Excellencies, distinguished Deputy Minister of Namibia for Marginalized Communities, distinguished Chairperson of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, distinguished Chairperson of the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples, distinguished representatives of Indigenous peoples, distinguished delegates and observers. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this commemoration of the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. 10 years ago, the United Nations General Assembly made history when it adopted the Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples. It was a result of concerted efforts and collaboration between indigenous peoples and member states that took over 20 years to negotiate. The adoption of the declaration marked the beginning of a new partnership between indigenous peoples and member states. The declaration is the most comprehensive international legal instrument that sets out the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the indigenous peoples of the world. The declaration marks an important step forward for the recognition, promotion, and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples. It sets out the right of indigenous peoples to self-determination, their rights to lands, territories, and resources, and to determine their priorities and strategies for development. In this context, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent is extremely important. As the declaration states, member states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the indigenous peoples before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. 10 years later, I'm pleased to say that there has been significant progress in implementing the declaration at the international, regional, and national levels. The constitutions and laws have been amended in some countries to recognize indigenous peoples and the diversity of their populations. Regional and national courts have invoked the declaration to protect indigenous people's rights, and the national laws and policies are also gradually taking together account of the distinct identity and the rights of indigenous peoples. At the international level, issues concerning indigenous peoples are firmly on the agenda of the United Nations. We had the first World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in September 2014, which further institutionalized the principle of partnership and cooperation between member states and the indigenous peoples as a basic pillar of international process. We have, as a result, a system-wide action plan on indigenous peoples that provides the framework for the United Nations support, in particular at the country level, where the needs are the most urgent. We have 3 indigenous specific mechanisms: the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples Issues, the Special Rapporteur, and the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples, to advise the United Nations on how we can strengthen our work with indigenous peoples. Yet, we must recognize that despite these achievements and gains, tremendous gaps remain. For example, indigenous peoples face high levels of poverty, poor health, and low education levels. The situation of indigenous women is grave. Virtually all indicators of well-being, where and when available, indicate that indigenous peoples are still often left behind. Today, as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we must commit to do more. There is a new paradigm shift with the 2030 Agenda, with its focus on placing people at the center of sustainable development. Working with indigenous peoples, member states, and other partners together, we can make sure that the sustainable development goals are met and that no one is left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, let's work together to continue to make the Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples a living document. I thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
We thank you, Mr. Undersecretary General. And we are truly honored to have an Undersecretary General like you today with us, championing the issue of indigenous rights, needs, dreams, hopes. And thank you for reminding us also that the 2030 Agenda is a crucial opportunity to accelerate progress for indigenous peoples. It is therefore essential that indigenous peoples are an integral part, as you said, of the 2030 Agenda's implementation, leaving no one behind and people-centered. I would like now to invite Mrs. Mariam Wallet Abu Bakrine, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, chairperson of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, to address the meeting on behalf of the 3 United Nations mechanisms on indigenous peoples' issues, namely the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Thank you. Merci.
Merci, Madame Bass. Vous prononcez très bien mon nom. Excellence, Monsieur Zenin Liu, sous-secrétaire général du département des affaires économiques et sociales. Madame Bass, honorable Royal Joan Khao, c'est moi qui dois m'excuser, je pense que je ne l'ai pas bien prononcé, sous-ministre des communautés marginalisées de la Namibie. Monsieur Albert Baromé, président du mécanisme d'experts des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, honorable grand chef Wilton Littlechild, représentants des États membres ici présents avec nous, ainsi que toutes les personnes qui ont fait le déplacement ici pour célébrer avec nous cette journée internationale des peuples autochtones du monde. Permettez-moi, avant de commencer ma présentation officielle, que comme Mme Bass l'a souligné, je lirai au nom des 3 mécanismes des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, de manifester ma joie d'avoir non seulement au niveau international, avoir eu des échos très réjouissants du degré dans lequel cette journée est célébrée de par le monde, mais également de voir que cette salle ici est assez remplie pour venir célébrer avec nous ici dans la maison de tous, c'est-à-dire les Nations Unies, cette journée internationale des peuples autochtones, qui est aussi aujourd'hui toute particulière parce que nous y célébrons aussi le 10e anniversaire de la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Donc, je vous remercie à tous d'avoir fait ce déplacement parmi nous. Maintenant, je vais lire ma déclaration officielle. Il y a maintenant 10 ans que l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies a adopté la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones en tant qu'instrument international le plus complet pour la défense des droits de l'homme des peuples autochtones. Fruit de plus de 20 ans de négociations, la déclaration apparaît aujourd'hui comme un symbole de progrès, un cadre de réconciliation et une référence en matière de droit. Toutefois, une décennie plus tard, force est de reconnaître, comme l'a mentionné Monsieur le sous-secrétaire des Nations Unies pour le développement économique et social, il reste des défis majeurs. Dans nombre de cas, les peuples autochtones sont en proie davantage de luttes et de violations des droits qu'il y a 10 ans, donc l'adoption de la déclaration. Les peuples autochtones sont toujours victimes du racisme et de la discrimination et n'ont toujours pas accès sur un pied d'égalité aux services de base, y compris les soins de santé et l'éducation. Lorsque des données statistiques sont disponibles, elles montrent clairement qu'ils sont laissés pour compte sur tous les fronts, en proie à des niveaux de pauvreté disproportionnés, à une baisse de l'espérance de vie et à des faibles taux de réussite scolaire. La perte de leurs terres et de leurs territoires sur leurs ressources, piliers de leurs moyens de subsistance et de leurs identités culturelles, représente des défis majeurs pour les peuples autochtones. Les femmes autochtones sont doublement discriminées, d'une part en tant que femmes et d'autre part en tant que membres de communautés autochtones. Elles sont souvent exclues des processus décisionnels et privées de droits fonciers et beaucoup d'entre elles sont victimes de violences. Nous appelons tous les États à prendre toutes les dispositions utiles pour permettre aux femmes autochtones d'exercer pleinement leurs droits consacrés par la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Les conditions de travail extrêmes, difficiles et dangereuses des défenseurs des droits fondamentaux des Autochtones partout dans le monde témoignent de l'aggravation de la situation des droits de l'homme des peuples autochtones. Les individus et les communautés qui osent défendre les droits des Autochtones se voient étiquetés comme des obstacles au progrès, des forces anti-développement et dans certains cas des ennemis de l'État, voire des terroristes. Certains risquent même leur vie. D'après certaines ressources, 281 défenseurs des droits de l'homme ont été assassinés dans 25 pays, rien que l'année dernière, soit plus du double qu'en 2014. La moitié d'entre eux étaient engagés dans la défense des droits fonciers, autochtones et environnementaux. Nous prions instamment les États de protéger les défenseurs des droits de l'homme des peuples autochtones. Les crimes à leur encontre doivent faire l'objet d'enquêtes et de poursuites en bonne et due forme et leurs auteurs être traduits en justice. Les peuples autochtones sont de plus en plus entraînés dans des conflits autour de leurs terres, leurs ressources et leurs droits. La paix durable exige que les États établissent, avec le concours de la communauté internationale, des mécanismes de résolution des conflits auxquels les peuples autochtones participent pleinement et effectivement, en particulier les femmes autochtones. Nombre d'États ne reconnaissent toujours pas les peuples autochtones. Les femmes et les jeunes restent en particulier privés de reconnaissance officielle et exclus de la vie politique directe. Même dans les États où une législation est en vigueur, la déclaration n'a pas entièrement mise en œuvre. Il est grand temps de reconnaître les formes de gouvernance et de représentation propres aux peuples autochtones et de les renforcer afin d'établir un dialogue constructif et un engagement des autorités nationales et internationales, des fonctionnaires et du secteur privé. L'heure est venue de respecter les normes minimales pour la survie, la dignité et le bien-être des peuples autochtones du monde énoncées dans la déclaration. Elles incluent le droit à l'identité, à la langue, à la santé, à l'éducation et à l'autodétermination, ainsi que le devoir des États de consulter les peuples autochtones et de coopérer avec eux pour obtenir leur consentement libre, préalable et éclairé avant d'adopter et de mettre en œuvre des mesures susceptibles de les affecter. Et ces droits sont tous interreliés. La déclaration traduit d'importants changements dans la structure et la pratique des politiques à l'échelle mondiale et des changements positifs de la situation des peuples autochtones et un plus grand respect pour les visions du monde autochtone ont été enregistrés au cours des 10 dernières années. Toutefois, il reste encore beaucoup à accomplir pour que les peuples autochtones puissent jouir pleinement de leurs droits de l'homme au sens de la déclaration. Nous demandons à tous les États de combler l'écart entre les paroles et les actes et d'agir dès à présent pour garantir l'égalité et les droits de tous les peuples autochtones. Ainsi, je lance cet appel également à tout le système des Nations Unies, hautement représenté aujourd'hui par Monsieur le sous-secrétaire général pour les affaires économiques et sociales, Monsieur Liu, dont je salue la présence ici et que j'accueille encore et que j'espère qu'il sera, comme son prédécesseur, encore avec une plus grande oui avec les peuples autochtones. Vous avez une équipe aussi bien par Madame Daniela Bass, mais également le secrétariat de l'instance permanente qui est dévoué pour cette cause. Alors nous vous invitons à davantage avoir lui pour les questions autochtones. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Bien, merci encore pour votre parole, très gentille. En fait, nous faisons notre travail, mais avec passion et motivation. So thank you for your joint statement, Madame Aboubakrin, and commitment to Indigenous peoples of the world. And I would also like to thank the UN agencies, funds, and programs for their statements on this day. Many. We have already hereby concluded the high-level segment of this commemoration of the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. I would like to thank again the Undersecretary General for the Economic and Social Affairs, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the chairperson of the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues for being with us today. I understand the Undersecretary General has very pressing commitments. Having arrived only recently, he has already taken over many, many activities. I wonder how we can do that. So thank you very much for having attended the opening today. Thank you very much.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
I hope you will have
Yes.
very nice second segment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like now to invite the Chief of the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, that is Chandra Roy, to conduct the second part of the commemoration, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. And as was mentioned, I'm Chandra Roy Henriksen, and I'm from the team that supports the work of the Permanent Forum, as well as the UN on Indigenous matters related here at the United Nations headquarters. We are based at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in the Division for Social Policy and Development, and it is indeed a great honor to have the Undersecretary General with us, as well as the Director of the Division for Social Policy and Development, and our chair, very own chair of the Permanent Forum here with us today. We are going to move on now to the second part of the day, and this will be with a panel discussion. However, before we go on to the panel discussion, we are going to invite you to see a short movie which is on the Ainu people in Japan, and this was produced by the Department of Public Information of the UN TV. We will first see the film, and then we will hear some remarks, and then move on to the panel discussion. Can we have the movie on now? Are we set?
アイヌ民族の人たちは樺太千島北海道に住んで、そして大きな移動もなく暮らしていた、そういう先住の民族であると言われております。明治4年から9年まで戸籍を作って日本人民にしてしまいます。アイヌの了解は全くありませんでした。そしてアイヌ語を禁止して日本人になりなさいと言って日本の言葉を話すようにしました。もちろん住んでいた家土地までも国有地にしてしまった制御である狩猟、漁労、採取すべて禁止したという経緯がございます。
いてきもころ、いてきもころ、眠るなという文です。もころ、眠るの前に。
私のおばあちゃんはやっぱり子供の頃アイヌ語を聞きながら育ってっていうそういうおばあちゃんだったので、私が子供の時にはよくアイヌ語を日本語の中に単語レベルの話を混ぜながら話してたんですよね。言葉が大切だっていうふうに思えるようになったのは自分が子供を産んでからで、おばあちゃんがやっぱりやってきたように自分もやっぱり何か残さなきゃならないのかなって思ってるんですよね。今アイヌ語教室週1回木曜日の日にやっていまして、どんどん増えてて、今はもう歌ったりカルタしたり遊んだりっていうそっちの方ですごく楽しく自分たちで意欲的に来てくれて、親がうっかり忘れたもんなら親の方に子どもたちが「なんで言ってくれなかったの?」みたいな、それぐらいなんか子どもたち熱心に通ってくれて、耳に残ってるアイヌ語ってすごく大切だなって感じて、子どもたちには今種を植えてるっていう状態で、成長していく中でアイヌ語を自分たちでどうにかしなきゃって思える子どもたちが一人でもできたなら それでまたつながっていく、残されていくって信じてるから。サランメニニシコトゥリサランメニセアホアホアホ。メラという音楽ユニットやってまして、いろんなポップスからクラシカルからロックからエレクトロニカから結構いろんなジャンルの音楽をやってるんですけど、歌は、日本語とアイヌ語と英語で歌ってます。でイメラは十勝方言のアイヌ語で稲光が光るという意味のユニットの名です。私のルーツなので、それを自然に取り入れていて、でアイヌの伝統の歌とか、あと楽器トンコリとかムックリとか、そういう楽器も取り入れた楽曲もいくつかあります。
私は1996年からスイスのジュネーブにある国連本部に参加をするようになりました。そこで世界の先住民族の仲間が私たちと一緒と同じようなことを言っておりました。もともと数千年も数万年も住んでいたのに、よそからたくさんの勢力を持っている人たちが侵略をして征服をされて支配をされている。しかしそれでも私たちが自分たちの言語や文化をしたいと、そのように訴えている仲間がいることを知りました。私は本当に感動して心打たれて、世界の仲間と国連で活動するという決意をして戦ってまいりました。権利宣言を2007年9月13日の国連総会で採択することができました。本当に嬉しかったです。
お客さんはアイヌのことをよく知らないで来る人がほとんどなので、イメラのステージで初めてアイヌの楽器とかアイヌ語っていう言葉を知るっていう人が多いんですけど、結構皆さん興味持たれたり面白いなと思ってもらう人がすごく多くて、特にこのムックリの音とかは初めて聞いたら結構会場がシーンとなっておーみたいなのはよくありますね。はい、意外に日本でもアイヌの文化とか言葉とか存在に触れる機会ってそんなにないので、イメラを聞いたお客さんに新しい日本の多様性みたいなのは感じてもらえる機会になってるかなと思ってます。
現在2020年オリパラに向かってですね、象徴的な空間が出来上がって、国立アイヌ民族博物館も出来上がってですね、国民の理解促進のためにやっていただけると、そのように確信をしております。世界の先住民族の先進国の例に倣って、先住民族の権利宣言をぜひ国民の皆さん方に理解をしていただきたい。そして世界の仲間と、また日本の皆さん方と同じように胸を張ってアイヌ民族だと言って頑張れるような、そういう社会をぜひ作っていただきたいというお願いが私たちの今の希望であります。
As this film beautifully shows, Indigenous peoples have much to contribute to humanity, to culture, and to diversity. As this International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples shows, and we are all here today to celebrate that, we will be commemorating with a panel discussion. But before that, I would like to ask Mr. Takashi Mizuro, who is the Second Secretary of the Permanent Mission of Japan, to deliver some brief remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Good afternoon. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all those involved in the dedicated effort to prepare this event. The government of Japan has made efforts to develop comprehensive policy aiming to achieve a society in which the dignity of the Ainu people is fully respected and their status is promoted. After the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples, the government established the Advisory Council for Future Ainu Policy with participation of experts and representatives of the Ainu people. The Advisory Council submitted its final report in 2009. To realize the policies recommended in the report, the government established another council composed of 14 members, including several Ainu representatives. The council has continuously held consultations. The first pillar of Japan's current policy is promotion and awareness raising of Ainu culture. The government is providing assistance to various projects such as Ainu language education by training teachers and developing learning materials, as well as providing support to traditional ceremonies and production of handicrafts. The second pillar is improvement of the living standard of the Ainu people. The prefectural government, with financial support from the national government, has implemented measures such as education assistance, including scholarships, employment assistance, modernization of the agriculture and fishery sectors, and industrial promotion of small companies. The government is now developing a symbolic space for ethnic harmony, which will consist of a National Ainu Museum and Park, as mentioned in the video, as a national center for revitalizing Ainu culture. The symbolic space will be open in 2020 to coincide with the Tokyo 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games. The space will serve as a base for traditional Ainu culture and promoting nationwide understanding of the history and culture of the Ainu. Japan will continue to work closely with the Ainu people to achieve a society where the diversity of all people is respected. Japan is also committed to making effort to tackle many issues faced by indigenous people in the world, in cooperation with the United Nations and other actors of the international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mizuni, for your remarks and for being here with us today. And actually, I think it should something very proud of the way in Japan with the Ainu people, and I look forward very much to working closely with you. Thank you. I would now like to invite the panelists to come and join me here at the podium. If I can ask His Excellency, the Honorable Minister, Mr. Royal Johan, to come and join us. And then if I can ask Grand Chief Fulton Littlechild to also come here with us, and Mr. Albert Barumi of the Expert Mechanism. If you three gentlemen would like to join us here we can continue with the panel discussion. Your Excellency, you are here. And Willie, we have you here. We have a neighbor. We have a neighbor to you next to you, but you can sit here, no problem. Up to you.
Yes.
As you please. Yes. We will proceed with the panel discussion. I have the honor of having three extremely inspiring Indigenous experts here with us, and they will shed light on the advancements that have been made, the gains that we have been able to achieve working together, but to also highlight what are the remaining challenges in implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples 10 years after its adoption. We will start with His Excellency, the Honorable Minister Royal Johan Chau, who's the Deputy Minister of Marginalized People of Namibia. Minister, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, to give me or grant me this opportunity. Let me also use this opportunity to thank our His Excellencies who are present with us. Honorable Chief, I'm also one of the chiefs. That's why I'm having this dress or this head. A band symbolizes that I'm also from the chief. Let me also thank all the dignitaries who are present here today, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to share with you what my country is doing, and that is Namibia. So my name is Royal Jonah Kau Tswitsotso from Africa, but particularly in Namibia. And I'm a deputy minister responsible for the Sun. Sun is known international as the Kalahari Bushmen of Vatwe and Ovachimba. Mi juasiko kama heo gwake mi hom ete wi ikago cha na te mi kaleke ikatsa akago thiringwe kwete mna kosege e oju wasga eskago kato okong ai therisi. So I was just translating what I said in English so that you can even hear my language. So Namibia is honored for having been invited to the esteemed occasion, an occasion that marks the celebration of the International Day of the World Indigenous Peoples and also the 10th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, of which my beloved country is a signatory. Namibia is a small nation of about 2.3 million people. I am also fortunate to have been appointed as the Deputy Minister of Marginalized or Indigenous Communities in Namibia, as I am from those or the same communities which I've mentioned earlier on myself. Today I'm here not only as a representative of the government, but also a member of the marginalized indigenous communities, which I'm so proud of. The responsibility of the Namibian government is to advance the human rights of the aforementioned communities through dedicated, targeted interventions, which will result in the social integration of these communities, creating employment opportunities for them, and ensure that they do not have, I beg your pardon, to ensure that they do have access to land through our settlement program, which is working very well. And all of us, we are aware of the fact that things cannot be 100% perfect, but at least Namibia is doing well by having a person like me to represent the same group. It is not easy for government to remedy the historical injustices imposed on the indigenous peoples or marginalized communities. It is equally important to ensure that the protection of their human rights through the appropriate application of both our domestic and international laws. Namibia has made great strides towards the elimination of racial discrimination against marginalized indigenous communities through the provision of essential services, such as access to land. Namibia is characterized by skewed land ownership and distribution patterns inherited from the colonial past. Therefore, the government, through the Minister of Land Reform, has prioritized resettlement beneficiaries in its national resettlement program, which include the marginalized or the indigenous peoples of Namibia. During the period of 10 years, 9 farms were procured for the marginalized indigenous peoples, which is over 50,000 hectares, where about 1,500 households were settled. Access to health. Namibia has been trying her level best through the Ministry of Health and Social Services to ensure that the marginalized or indigenous communities have access to health facilities, which has been done by the construction of clinics in areas nearby those communities, and in the event the communities are found in far remote areas. The government of the Republic of Namibia has been sending teams with mobile clinics to cater for the health needs of these communities. Coming to access to education. After independence, the government abolished most discriminatory laws and policies, including the desegregation of the education system. The learners from the marginalized communities have free access to education and receive assistance to support them with all their needs while attending school. About 60% of the budget, or a budget of my office, for these marginalized communities goes to education support, both at primary, secondary, and university levels, because we are sure that education is the truth-worth tool for social integration and the greatest equalizer. Having said that, the high dropout rates are an extremely concern, which is attributed to factors such as lack of proper parental care, lack of role models, school uniforms, toiletrines, sanitation pads, and other social evils. Access to natural resources. Namibia is trying its best under difficult circumstances to conserve its resources. Conservation or conservancies have also been established in the communal areas where indigenous people live. This is to ensure that the natural resources under their jurisdiction are conserved and utilized on a sustainable basis. Namibia hailed internationally for implementing the novel concept where the management of natural resources is in the hands of the local people under community-based natural resources management, CBNRM, in national parks and game reserves, which are in areas where some of the indigenous peoples live. The government gives them conditional rights in terms of the hunting and tourism concessions. For hunting concessions, indigenous peoples are authorized to practice controlled hunting to avoid misuse and illegal hunting. We agree that the Declaration is the most comprehensive international instrument on the rights of indigenous peoples, and therefore believe that the implementation of the Declaration has been accorded the commitment it deserves over the decade, and that some achievement could be observed in this regard. Namibia is not excluded from some of these successes, even though we did not ratify the Convention 169. Namibia's successes can be described as unique. due to the commitment of the government and the political will that serve as a guarantee. The government is aware that there are still gaps between the formal recognition of marginalized indigenous peoples and the implementation of policies on the ground. However, the government is busy finalizing a draft white paper policy document. Consultations in this regard are in full swing under the end of September this year. The white paper will be the tool which will open fresh discussions for the recognition of the indigenous peoples in Namibia. We extend our appreciation for the support we are currently receiving from the UN Division for Social Policy and Development in conducting consultations with our communities about the white paper. The overall achievement in terms of the Namibian government is the acknowledgement of the predicament of the three groups, namely the San, Ovatwe, and Obachimba. Because this put these targeted communities in an advantage position to receive first-hand support regarding essential services such as access to health, education, land, and natural resources. To justify the affirmation, the government has demonstrated its political will in terms of a technical capacity and financial commitment. 10 years back, we started with a meager 300,000 Namibian dollars, and today we are boosting with a full accounted department and wish to become a ministry on its own in the near future. Yes, of course, there will be some challenges here and there. Some development interventions were not so effective due to lack of resources, which is exacerbated by the remoteness and other social problems. Low levels of education among the marginalized or indigenous communities, lack of culture to keep and accumulate assets, and lack of a dedicated strategy that defines integration and mainstreaming, which resulted in an ad hoc approach to the plight of the marginalized or indigenous communities. Data on marginalized groups are particularly difficult to obtain, as by law, data collection by ethnicity is prohibited, and some marginalized groups are subgroups within a large ethnic grouping. May I use this opportunity to congratulate the UN on its 22nd commemoration of the International Day of the Indigenous Peoples and those who have been working so hard on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples for the past 10 years. Namibia continued to honor its obligation on the declaration and other protocols under which we are obligated to serve our communities. And with this, and I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, and it is indeed a great honour, and I'd like to thank our colleagues at the Permanent Mission of Namibia and His Excellency the Ambassador for also supporting having Mr. Honourable Minister here with us today. It is indeed a great honour because it is not often that we have Indigenous representatives who are also occupying these positions of power and of influence, and it is a great pleasure to actually listen to you and see that there is uneven progress. You have many achievements, yet you have some challenges, and this in a way reflects the reality that we have across and among and in between Indigenous peoples living in different countries. We will now move on to our second speaker, and this is the Grand Chief Wilton Littlechild. The Grand Chief is a lawyer, an advocate, and has been working tirelessly for Indigenous people's rights for the last 40 years. It is indeed a great honor and a privilege to have him with us here today. He was also a former member of parliament, so also embodies in a way different hats, or should I say different headwear that the chief has been wearing. And he was also a member both of the Permanent Forum when it was first established, as well as of the expert mechanism. So a person who has a great amount of experience, of knowledge, but above all of great integrity and passion for Indigenous people's rights. Please, sir.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I wanted to tell you a 40-year story in 5 minutes. But actually, it's older than that, as you'll see. But it's also a parallel story of what happened in Canada recently. So I begin with the initial journey when in 1923, Chief Descahe from the Haudenosaunee went to the League of Nations to try and express the concerns of his peoples. And in 1925, the spiritual leader for the Maori people, Ratane, also tried to get audience at the League of Nations, but both of them, of course, couldn't get that audience. Fortunately for Chief Descahe, the mayor of the city of Geneva allowed him to present their concerns. And that's where the story begins in the modern times. From that point on till 1977, we had no voice at the international arena, no voice at all. But in 1977, my people, the Cree Nation, had very serious concerns about our treaty violations, Treaty number 6 in our case. And the spiritual leaders and the chiefs concluded that we needed to go back to the international arena to express our concerns as well. So in 1981, the day at which we're commemorating today, the working group started their meetings. And then, of course, the story unfolds. We have now, from no voice to specific mechanisms here at the United Nations. Of course, we have the Permanent Forum. We have the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the expert mechanism, and the voluntary fund that was established to assist delegations to come to the UN, and a senior official at the Secretary General's office. So from zero voice to these areas of importance, we've now got a voice. In 2001, the Special Rapporteur's office, I should say, as my colleague Chandra just said, I spent 40 years doing this. Be careful what you say at the UN. I proposed a resolution in Geneva that a Special Rapporteur be established. And then I presented the resolution that the Permanent Forum needed to be established. And the third resolution I proposed was on the expert mechanism. So be careful what you say. But in seriousness, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, currently Vicky Tauli Corpus, the name was changed in 2010 to underscore the term Indigenous Peoples. Then we have, of course, the Permanent Forum, for which I had the honor of serving as rapporteur for the first 6 years. Then again at the UN Expert Mechanism, I had the honor of chairing 2 sessions of the Expert Mechanism. So we have now these different opportunities to present our concerns. But in the journey of trying to realize our rights, it's much like an eagle, I always say, with the 2 wings. On one wing is the UN Declaration, and on the other wing are the treaties. And it'll take both wings to fight for the eagle, the true reconciliation to happen and to fly. Next, please. Now we have this international legal framework, the ILO conventions, number 107 and 169. I remember chairing the meeting of the World Conference in 1977 on the ILO Convention 107. I didn't actually know what that was to begin with, but they said, oh, don't worry about it, we'll fax you a copy. And sure enough, they did, but after the convention was done, the World Conference, they said, well, now that you've chaired the meeting, go to Geneva and get it changed. Well, 5 years I thought maybe, but in any event, we ended up getting the ILO Convention 169, and of course the declaration that we're commemorating today. But recently there's been an event here in North America, 40 Americas, by the OAS. They adopted an OAS Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I mention that because now going forward, at least in the Americas, we need to read these two declarations together because they complement each other. And where there's a higher standard, either in the UN Declaration or the OAS Declaration, it's the higher standard that applies. The Convention on Rights of the Child also adopted a specific comment on Indigenous children. So when states go to assess their compliance to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, they now must look to comment number 11 because it's specific to the rights of Indigenous children. We have the Paris Agreement on climate change, the first time an international convention, a legally binding convention, mentions Indigenous rights. So that's a significant achievement as well. And of course, we have the Biological Diversity Convention. I was thinking, because it's a decade and 10 years, I thought, what would be the 10 most significant contributions by Indigenous peoples to the international family, to humankind? And I've come up with 10 because over the years, although we argued for recognition, we argued for the rights to be adopted for our people, we actually contributed a lot to humankind. Two very significant ones that I recall. First of all, the UN system recognizes economic, social, and cultural rights and civil and political rights. But it was not until our elders asked to be allowed to say an invocation at the UN meeting that something changed in the UN. I remember being told, actually, Mr. Littlechild, we don't pray at the United Nations. And I said, well, it's not really a prayer, it's an invocation, it's a thanksgiving. We ask our elders to offer thanksgiving. And I was asked, and how long is that going to take? I said, well, I don't know, it's the elders, we asked them. So anyway, she said, you have 3 minutes. So I went back to the elders and I said, we have 3 minutes we can offer. So they came in with 4 hand drums. They start singing prayer song. And she says, Mr. Littlechild, it's 7 minutes. How long are they going to take? I said, I don't know. But you know what happened? Now, every day, the meetings, when they open at the UN, they start with a prayer. But even more importantly, I think, a 6th bundle of rights has been recognized, and those are spiritual rights. This, elders, from our meetings, was a contribution that they made to humankind, that spiritual rights are now recognized globally for all peoples. Which one of you is going to argue for my brother the fish? Who among you is going to argue for my brother the bird that flies? The 4-legged that dies so that we can live? Who among you is going to argue for clean air and clean water? That was an elder who asked those questions in Geneva. And it was on that day that environmental consciousness arose at the UN, as we sit now debating on climate change. Again, that was an elder's contribution to the UN. The Rio summit that was held on environment, the elders played a significant role to contribute Indigenous perspective on the environment. Accomplishments like the inherent right to self-determination being recognized for Indigenous peoples. When we came to the UN, our elders said we must get our treaties honored and respected because they're international agreements. And we had a 9-year study done at the UN on treaties by the late Professor Miguel Alfonso Martinez. At the second session of the Permanent Forum, it was decided that women and their rights would be a cross-cutting theme among all the other mandated areas. The following year, it was for children, and then persons with disabilities. This focus on women, children, and persons with disabilities was introduced by Indigenous leaders. Then we look to the OAS declaration, and you'll see that for the first time, Indigenous laws are recognized. Family, the notion of an extended family, is now recognized in the OAS declaration. The importance of food at the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, that is not just for eating, it's also for sacred ceremony, spiritual ceremony. The recognition of holistic health and wellness, that our people look at health from the holistic perspective. It's not just physical health to be concerned about, but mental health, cultural health, and very importantly, spiritual health. So we have this holistic medicine wheel approach to health that was heard for the first time at the World Health Organization meetings. And yes, I'm biased, I have to say, the other area of recognition was through culture, the cultural manifestation of the right to self-determination through sport and traditional games. And just a couple of weeks ago, we concluded our second World Indigenous Games in Treaty 6 territory. I mention that to thank also the Permanent Forum, because through their efforts in 6 years, they supported that call for Indigenous traditional games and sports to be recognized. And a couple of weeks ago, 25 million people watched the traditional Indigenous games as they unfolded in Treaty 6 territory. I think also Indigenous leadership was also a contribution that we have made to humankind for positive resolution of issues, conflicts. Recently, we concluded the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. We made 94 calls to action. It was the largest class action lawsuit in Canadian legal history. What happens to a child when you take them away from their parents at 6, 7 years old and put them in an institution under the guise of education? What happens to the parents from whom you've taken those children? And what happens to the children that come after? Well, we heard almost 7,000 individual testimonies of former students in these schools. One of the court-ordered mandates we did not receive was what happened to the children who never came home, those that died in residential schools, died trying to cross a river by drowning, died freezing to death in the wintertime, running away from school. So we've now uncovered 4,300 names of those children so that families who didn't know what happened to their child or their relative can now put closure to that. Then we break out our stories in terms of themes. What were the highlights of these testimonies? But the important thing is, what do we do with that history? I can tell you the most horrific stories of abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, cultural, worst of all, sexual abuse that happened. Well, you take them now and you shape reconciliation. What does that look like? What does it mean? Well, you take reconciliation to mean, how do we restore respectful relationships? And I mention this part of the story because The UN Declaration plays a very significant role in that. We came out with 10 principles of reconciliation during this journey. And the very first one is that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a framework for reconciliation. That there are treaty rights that need to be honored and respected. That reconciliation is a process of healing relationships. That it requires action to address these harms that were done. That we need to create a more equitable society, closing the gaps that we all know about, that were mentioned many times at the hearings here in Permanent Forum. That the perspective of our elders is important. The traditional knowledge is important in the journey of how we can apply reconciliation on a long-term basis. Cultural revitalization and its importance in treatment. That it requires political will and joint leadership. And very importantly, sustained public education, especially with our young people, having dialogue with our young people. So these were the 10 principles that we came up with. But also in our 94 calls to action, 16 of them are on the UN Declaration. The first one, we call upon all the governments in Canada, federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal, and Indigenous peoples' governments, to fully adopt and implement the UN Declaration as a framework for reconciliation. That Canada should establish national action plans. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's the nurses and the police officers that meet with us for the first time on the streets. So we call on medical schools, nursing schools across Canada, all across Canada, to begin teaching their medical students, the nursing students, to study about treaty and to study the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We call upon the law societies across Canada, through the Federation of Law Societies, that all lawyers who are working with us now must take training, appropriate cultural competency training that includes studying the UN Declaration. This will take a skills-based training, intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and racism. We call upon the law schools, all the law schools across Canada. The students now must learn about the UN Declaration. We call upon again, governments to commit to the recognition and implementation of Aboriginal justice systems in a manner consistent with the UN Declaration. Next. We called upon the parties to the legal settlement to develop and sign a covenant on reconciliation. One of the steps, of course, is the full adoption and implementation of the Declaration, and the implementation of the Declaration, as a framework for reconciliation. The church parties. This involved not only the government of Canada, but 4 main churches that ran these schools to look at how they can comply with the UN Declaration, all the faith groups, ensuring, for example, that their policies and programs comply with the UN Declaration. We also call upon Indigenous peoples' right to self-determination in spiritual matters to be respected. That it's okay to have Indigenous spirituality according to Article 12 of the Declaration. Next. In keeping with the UN Declaration in collaboration with Indigenous peoples, we call on organizations to fund the establishment of Indigenous law institutes to develop, use, and understand Indigenous laws and access to justice. We call upon, governments to provide education to their public servants. For example, in the city close to me, they just recently concluded the last seminar for all of their staff 1,500 staff members now know about the UN Declaration. Next, sorry, I'm going to speed up here. Next. We also called on the museums and the archives to make sure they comply with the UN Declaration. Next. I was trying to be really fast at one presentation. I said, you know, my people, we have two serious challenges in health, and it's diabetes. And I said, what? I think I just created a new word. What I meant to say was diabetes and obesity. Another time I said, these calls to action are so important that these 94 calls, they're about reconciliation. Another new word. So I'm trying to speed up here. Just go on then, please, to the next one. We call on journalism schools. All the media people have to be trained now on the UN Declaration. And lastly, the private industry in Canada. Corporations are now making sure from the highest level, the president and the executive directors of their corporations are now studying the UN Declaration. This is all an effort to ensure that because of this 10-year history where we started we started from opposition by Canada on the day that the UN Declaration was adopted, to a statement recently and many times repeated by the Prime Minister that no relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with Indigenous peoples. It's time, he said, for a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples based on the recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Well, the recognition of rights we talk about is the Declaration itself and also the treaties. In the mandate letter to the Minister on Indigenous and Northern Affairs, Prime Minister stated to her, in particular, I expect you to deliver on your top priorities to support reconciliation, to follow up on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations, starting with the implementation of the UN Declaration. What a change over 10 years from opposition to a statement that was made here last year when the Minister of Indigenous Affairs from Canada came here and made a statement saying, I'm here to announce on behalf of Canada that we are now a full supporter of the Declaration without qualification. So this decade that we look at for us has been very, very significant, the change that has happened. The Mayan people at a ceremony asked me to join a ceremony that's been done every 400 years, at which time they make a prophecy when a long-term calendar came to an end and they were going to welcome the new calendar. They made a prophecy of 4 things. Spirituality must come back to leadership, they said. And Indigenous women must take a more prominent role in leadership. That we must build on the strengths of our people, not always putting each other down, but to lift each other up. But lastly, we must work very, very hard on unity. That was the message. This is my school. You see, in this residential school, for the first 11 years of my life, the first day of that school, my name was taken, Maikan Mohteo, or Willie, little child, and replaced with number 65. So for all those years, 65, come here. 65, pick up that pencil, stupid. 65, why did you do that, you idiot? So what happens to a child when you do that? So we have the building here in the middle. At the top were the sisters, that's where they lived. And sometimes my wife asks me, how do you know this? That the floor next down there is the girls' dormitory. But the reason I know it is because my sisters, 9 of them, went to school there too. Then the dining hall, the classroom block, the boys' dorm, where the big boys, the little boys, and the medium boys, But in the back, there's a horse barn, there's a cow barn, there's a chicken coop, there's a hog barn. And it was really self-sufficient. But the last slide is the same school. And I don't think you can see this, but there's a wire fence in front of this school. And people say, oh, get over it. It's a barbed wire fence. So what? Well, I'm here to tell you that was an electric fence. And that's where I lived for 11 years. So to come here 10 years later, to be able to merge these two stories together, one with a very bright light. Throughout this journey of the Declaration, we kept in mind what the elders were dreaming about. When I asked them, what is it that you want from this work? They said, all we want is respect, recognition, and justice. So 10 years later, I ask you, do we have justice? Do we have recognition? And do we have respect? So the answer to that should guide us to the next 10 years. What are we going to do for the next decade to ensure the dreams of our elders come alive, to ensure that we can live the treaty rights, the UN Declaration rights, the OAS Declaration rights, as they were meant to apply to us for the survival, the dignity, and well-being. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I don't think there's anything I can say to that was not said, but just to thank Chief Wilton Littlechild for sharing with us so generously of his experiences, which are very personal, very moving, and very difficult, but for sharing that with us. And I hope that we can use this to guide out our work as we go forward so that these things never happen again. I also want to build on what Chief Wilton Littlechild had said in terms of Canada and how Canada saw the wisdom of its ways and now so fully endorses the declaration. And in fact, today we were very pleased that the Prime Minister actually sent out a message on the declaration. We have had 3 heads of states that have made statements on the declaration from Canada, as I mentioned, from Bolivia and from Ecuador, and we're hoping that perhaps there will be others coming up as well in the future. Speaking of Ecuador, we had another representative, another expert who was supposed to come and join us at this meeting. It's Mr. Luis Marcas, who is a very well-known Quechua expert and leader from Ecuador. Unfortunately, he sends his regrets and was unable to travel here due to some complications with his flights. He has sent his intervention, and we will make this available on the website. We move now to our 3rd distinguished speaker, and this is Mr. Albert Barume. He is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's the chair of the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as an expert member of the Working Group on Indigenous Peoples of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. He also worked at the ILO on the Convention 169, and in fact, if I may say so, was quite instrumental in the ILO's initiation and continuation of their work in Africa. He's an expert in human rights law and has a vast amount of experience and knowledge on these built up over the 20 years. We're very happy to have Mr. Barume here with us, and I'd like to ask you to now speak a few words on the declaration. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the invitation. It's extremely difficult to speak after two extremely eloquent but also moving speakers that I thank for very inspiring statements. Madam Chair, distinguished guests, as I've just been presented, I am currently chairing what is known as the Expert Mechanism on the Right of Indigenous Peoples. It's a sub-organ of the Human Rights Council body based in Geneva. And the reason I'm saying this is in relation to what the Chief have just concluded with, is that the declaration is seen by many, including many states, as a framework for reconciliation. And to that end, the member states of the Human Rights Council have requested our group, we are 7, to continuously track how the declaration is implemented, do some legal analysis, draw the trends, and provide advice. The reason being, understandably so, the declaration provides for some quite unique rights. They are not new, they are not special, but those rights have unique dimensions. And I'm saying this from experience because the expert mechanism, having undertaken a number of those focused thematic studies, we have come to understand how complex these rights are, but also to understand why states are interested in knowing how the declaration is being implemented, whether the interpretation is getting the right is one thing, writing or protecting or providing for a right in an international instrument, and is a completely another thing to implement it in a specific national context. So what I will share with you very, very briefly here, it's a very short overview of what have come up through our work. That work of looking at how the declaration has been or is being implemented at country level by different states and other stakeholders. And I will do that through maybe 3 cluster points. The first point being what the declaration, in our view, have achieved so far. And if I have to put it in one sentence, I would say the declaration has triggered legal and policy reform, so standard settings and institutional creation. That is one of our conclusions we have told states, that over the last years, yes, we have seen in country revising laws, as you have heard from this platform here. We have seen country revising policies, adopting new law, setting new programs, setting up special commissions, Chief have just cited one, or special councils. We just had a statement about member states, about council established for groups. We have also seen states opening space for indigenous political participation. Over the last 10 years, some countries have, for instance, provided for quota participation of indigenous people in parliament, have appointed indigenous representative as ministers, and we do have one on the floor. indigenous languages in some country have been recognized through a policy document or a legal instrument. And regional and national courts or judges have made a couple of decisions, some of them remarkable and landmarking. So, yes, one should say the declaration has made change, or maybe is making change. But the change that the declaration is making or has made is in standard setting and institutional creation. And the question is, as we advise the Council, the question we ask the Council, do you, just by adopting laws and policies, establishing a new commission and institution, do such action change the living condition of people within communities, within those nations? It is a critical and important step. And yes, states that have taken those steps should be commended for it. Because, and that's my second point, just to give you an overview, from the different reports and analysis that we have undertaken, including on the right to education. We have done a study on the right to education. We have done a study on the right to participate in decision-making, on the right to health, on the right to language, cultural heritage, and numerous others. The study have revealed indeed that indigenous continue, their life is business as usual, the daily lives, in most cases, characterized by unequal access to rights. And the reason we are underlining the unequal access to rights is because there have been views by certain member states and certain stakeholders that indigenous people are claiming new and special rights within the declaration. That instrument that many are yet to read and really fully understand provides for preferential treatment, preferential rights that would put indigenous people above other sections of national populations. What those reports are showing that where data do exist, and in the joint statement of my colleagues that was highlighted, indigenous people access to basic services are still below national averages where those statistics exist. Indigenous children access to education, indigenous people access to health. The unequal access is evident. But there is something else in addition to the unequal access. There is also the disproportionate negative impact of violation and certain right-related factors, social factors. For instance, the high numbers of indigenous people in detention coming through our report. So this is not indigenous people not accessing rights, but this is indigenous people disproportionately being affected by certain social issues. There is a high rate of indigenous suicide among young indigenous peoples in certain countries that came through a number of our reports. A high number of drug and alcohol abuse in certain communities. A very disproportionate number of indigenous people languages disappearing came also through one of the reports that we did on languages. We see Also interestingly, when we did the study on cultural heritage, it was almost shocking, if I might use the word, how many indigenous human remains and cultural objects populate museums across the world, comparing to non-indigenous human remains still being held in those museums. So again, we see large numbers of disproportionate negative impact of certain factors on indigenous people. And we're not talking about unequal access to rights. And third, and this will lead to what we are looking into in terms of suggesting states, we also noted a deliberate and continuing negative perceptions of indigenous way of life. The reason mostly being is that the land dispossession and denial of indigenous people right over resources have to be somehow explained. It has to be justified. It has to be explained. And there are explanations sometimes over human rights violations because certain policies that are structurally discriminatory have to be part of the public communication. If a state or a stakeholder have to continue looking as acting normally. And we noted through a study on indigenous businesses, we have just completed a study on indigenous businesses, establishing and starting from the point, the thinking point, that indigenous people had concept of profit, saving, selling, distributing, and producing goods, traditionally. Those mechanisms existed, but were suppressed and pushed to extinction for certain reasons. And one reason being the prejudiced public view that continue to be streamlined into different policies, whereby indigenous way of managing land and resources is considered as economically not viable. Business indigenous models seen as simply inadequate in a modern way. So public perception and the media that Chief was referring to appears through our studies as an important challenging aspect preventing the full enjoyment of indigenous people of most rights enshrined into the Declaration. That point leads me to what we're making in our different reports, as we don't make states ask not to make recommendations. So MRIP reports tend to be concluded with what we call advice. So we advise state, we give advice to state. And looking through those different advices makes this presentation reflect on where should we go from now on. Where should the world lead to 10 years after the Declaration? If we agree that there have been effort made in relation to setting standard in different countries, if we can agree that change is trickling down into laws, into policies, into programs, into institutions, that we are hearing more and more political commitments, as we just heard from this floor, that the political sensitiveness that used to exist on indigenous people's issue is fading away. Then the next 10 years should, and in our view, we have written that in numerous reports, states have already decided what those 10 years should look like. In 2014, in these same buildings, when they held the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, leading to the outcome documents, states recommitted themselves to the rights enshrined in the Declaration. But they did more beyond that. States came up with an outcome document. That outcome document listing very practical measures that need to be taken. And let me just list one. There have to be national action plans for the implementation of the declarations. As we speak, over the last years, we have less than 5. I don't even think we have reached that number. So we're not going to invent the wheel on how the declaration in the next 10 years, what should be happening. And for me, in our view, in our expert view, states have to start by this. But what is more interesting as well in the outcome document, and that's my second point, is the outcome document clearly indicates that the implementation of the declaration will not be state-centered only effort. That different actors will have to play a role. Yes, state will continue to be the sole responsible for implementing the declaration as an international instrument, but the private sector is explicitly referred to in the outcome document with clear expectation of what indigenous people and other stakeholders should expect from the private sector. International financial institutions are explicitly referred to with specific expectation. The civil society, the media, in relation to redressing the negative perception of where the implementation should go. So I believe if after the coming 10 years, if we have to celebrate another 10 years, on this platform, it shouldn't just be state and indigenous peoples. On that platform, in our view, we should have different stakeholders, not reporting, but sharing with other stakeholders what they have been doing in implementing the declaration. And let me finish this by saying something that I said in my concluding remark at our annual session in Geneva last July. The MRIP held its annual session in July. At that session, I said something about the tensions that are high between indigenous peoples and states. And that's across the continent. Africa, Asia, Latin America, North America, Europe, there are tensions between indigenous people. And the declaration it's one of those instruments beautifully crafted to bring about a dialogue. And I believe that's the reason it took so long. For those who have had time to go and read that instrument, it is not a usual treaty or legal instrument as we know them within the UN. And it contains those different mechanisms and procedures for dialogue that I believe are critically critically important for the next decade of the declaration. Because the implementation of the declaration will have to pass through indigenous people engaging in dialogue with states in what, and Grand Chief was mentioning, quoting the Canadian Prime Minister, through that spirit of partnership and mutual respect and the recognition of rights are and will be the bedrock of that dialogue. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much to Dr. Barumi for his remarks, and for painting a very clear and precise picture of what we are and where we are in terms of the international standard setting with the declaration, the achievements that have happened, and placing them within this institutional framework, which is very clear and very easy for, at least for others, to grasp in terms of where we are, where we have been, and where we want to go. I thank you also very much for also mentioning that it's a beautifully crafted document. I had not heard this before, and just to say that I was also involved when the declaration was being drafted, and beauty was not one of the things that we were actually looking at. So thank you very much for that. It kind of reminds us that you have to take a step back and sometimes read something in its entirety to fully get the picture and to see where it is aiming at. I also thank you very much for pointing out that the declaration provides the basis, the bedrock, as you said, for dialogue and cooperation. And I think that is exactly where we from the UN want to urge all of you to be working together towards, so that 10 years on, we have even more fantastic achievements and gains to report on. We will now open the floor up for some comments and questions, and I just want to remind everybody that after we finish, we will have a small reception for everybody to have an opportunity to meet, and this will be on this second floor express bar once we finish this discussion. But for the moment now, we will open up for comments and questions. And please, when you do give your comments, I'd like to ask if you can keep it to about 3 minutes maximum, so that others can also speak. And also when you do speak, please do introduce yourself and where you're coming from and your organization. We'll have a first round. Who would like to take the floor? Do I have any comments, questions? Wow, none. I think I shouldn't have mentioned those drinks. Oh, we have, okay, we have, I can see one. That first, okay, sir, you have the floor. Please introduce yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tokaya Tenkashla Wopla Waku Lemiacha Matowia Hemie Chankpe Opia Matiwa. My dear relatives, before we say anything, we always thank the Creator first. My Lakota name is Bear Woman. My English name is Joanne Spotted Bear. What I hold in my hand here is Agenda 21. Right here. And what I have on this side is I brought a family of 7 who's been contaminated by oil and water. And I have a 17-month-old baby here who's here right now, who is not going to live 5 to 10 years. And we have a bankrupt United States government that has no say and is throwing their weight around using de facto executive orders to kill children. This is a crime against humanity and against human rights and the Declaration of Human Rights. We are the owners of this land. We do not agree to nobody dying. I'd like to hand and ask the Madam Chair, please give this family, this man and this woman, 3 minutes each. They're not going to live for 5 or 10 years, and they may never come back. The doctors who are helping them are being murdered. 50 doctors this year were murdered in 1 year alone. Please give them a chance, Madam Chair, so that the indigenous population can realize that we're not the only ones being affected here. These white people are too. Hohechatelo, Madakya, Oyase. Just go ahead and just speak from your heart.
Hi, my name is Christina Murphy, and I'm from Flint, Michigan. My family was poisoned in 2014, and the city of Michigan, or Flint, continues to be poisoned to this day. Our government is telling people it is okay to shower in toxins, 3,800 parts per billion of lead, and it's okay to shower in that. They're killing us literally on our media. The government is telling our media to tell us that it's okay to shower. We have videos, we have paperwork, we have proof, we have all the facts to back up what I'm saying. My 17-month-old son, like she said, was born with all these contaminants in his blood because I am completely toxic from drinking the Flint River water that was untreated for 18 months. When you're a woman, your baby is made up of your minerals inside of your body and your vitamins, and my minerals and vitamins are made up of toxins, so my baby is completely toxic. He's asleep right now, but we brought him all the way here. My family's very sick, and we feel like this is very important factual things that can help humanity as a whole entire human race, not just one or the other. We all need to stand together and unite, and I fully support all of you in this room, and we all deserve a chance to live and have a good life, a healthy life. And right now, my family was ripped from that. There's 130,000 people back home in my city that all of that was ripped from them. There's no American dream to me. There's an American illusion, and we have been lied to and herded like sheep to do these things that we did not know, that we were polluting our own Mother Earth. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but we really didn't know. And we woke up because we got poisoned. So I apologize for my family that the cries of the Navajo Nation and Lakota and other nations were not heard before this happened to them. And we hope that our research can help each other.
Thank you very much. And we take this very much on board. We will ask the panelists to comment later on this. It's environmental degradation and contamination of waters is a very serious matter. As you know, climate change is something that is affecting all of us, and this is a very urgent issue. We will move on now to the next speaker. I see two hands. Yes, ma'am. You have the floor, ma'am. I can't. Yes, if you will please introduce yourself and speak very clearly into the mic. Yeah.
Hello.
No, the one above you, the one behind you. Yes. Yes.
It's not okay. Good afternoon, esteemed everyone and the panelists. I just have a question. My name is Gail Davis. I'm a United Nations partner. I'm an Academic Council for the United Nations System member and Listen Give Initiative with OSHA for World Humanitarian Day. My question to everyone, including the panel, is Indigenous people have the answer to climate change and the solutions to it, and they're not being heard. So my question is, how can we get it out there where it's not talking at people or flooded amongst so much content online, but actually connects with each and every person on the planet and mobilizes people into action just in small ways in their home, and understanding what's going on with Indigenous people about the land and how they're losing their land as well? That's my question.
Thank you, and I know that the panelists are all taking notes, so they will respond. We'll have one more question or comment. Yes?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairperson. I want to wish everybody happy Indigenous Day. It took so much for all of us to be here and to still be here today after everything that we have been subjected to. I very briefly want to speak to you about prophecies. We have the prophecy of the Condor and the eagle. The chief just mentioned that the eagle is flying, so is the condor. All the people in our communities that are standing for the water, that are protecting the forests, the mountains, the people that perhaps never heard of all these instruments and all these complicated processes that are taking place within the United Nations, but yet they are standing. You recently heard of Standing Rock, of the Indigenous people standing against transnational companies. We have leadership. We have people back at home living the traditional way of life and fighting for the natural resources. As the sister just mentioned, it is our traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples that has the answer to healing Mother Earth. There is no other solution. If there was another solution, we would have seen it by now. So I want to ask everyone in this room to please be aware of the fact that we are all fighting for water, which is the basic for life, for the rivers, for the oceans. We need water to survive, and it's not going to be available as we have seen it up until now. We actually have to stand everywhere, in every city, not only the Indigenous people, every color of people, and that's where I would mention the prophecy of the warriors of the rainbow. If you have not heard of it, please find out what it is. And also, just one more thing I want to mention. We are very concerned about our traditional knowledge and the fact that the scientific and technological community wants to assess it and study it. And what does that mean to us as Indigenous people? It is our knowledge. It is not to be studied. It is our contribution to Agenda 2030. It is our right to take our place in the international community as we are the guardians of the earth. Over 370 million Indigenous people that deserve participation in this institution. This is the house of Micah. The Hopi elders came to this house in 1993 and spoke to you. So please look it up. Thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I'm Babul Nakrik. I'm from Nagra. I'm from Bangladesh. And I have just one question. There is 10 years have been passed so far after we had adopted this declaration for the Indigenous people. Thanks to those countries who recognized Indigenous people's rights constitutionally, and hope other countries will recognize Indigenous people's rights very soon. I'm from Bangladesh. In my country, every political party promises constitutional recognition for the Indigenous people before they get elected. Unfortunately, and very sadly, when they are elected, they forget their promises. Present government also promised before they got elected. But after they got elected, this government said there is no indigenous people in Bangladesh. My question is, what is Permanent Forum has taken initiatives to sensitize these governments, those who are promising before they come into the power, but after they got elected, they refuses not to recognize the indigenous people's rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to now come back to the panelists to answer the questions, and I'm just going to put the chair of the Permanent Forum already on alert that after that, maybe perhaps you can respond to the last question. Would Chief Littlechild or the Minister like to respond to the questions that were raised earlier in terms of toxic pollution, traditional knowledge? Who would like to go first? Chief.
Thank you very much for those, not only for the question, but also the very important information on how our indigenous families are still continually to be affected. I think there's a new approach to environmental health, that not only are we looking at environmental degradation and its impact on human beings, but vice versa, looking at the degradation on the environment as well. One of the ways that I've seen that's quite encouraging in my view as an approach is to combine the efforts of a scientific panel, scientists who are experts on the environment, and having them meet together with wisdom keepers, traditional knowledge holders, as elders. These two panels beginning to meet to talk about a coordinated approach that incorporates both the scientific wisdom and also the elders' traditional wisdom. It's a new approach, but I think it's early signals are already indicating that it's a proper way to approach it. Actually, I remember when the chairperson for Rio was appointed, I asked for a meeting with him, and he asked me what he should do, given that he was appointed a chairperson for Rio. And I said, please include our elders. And that's why you have the chapter 21 on the environment from Rio. So there's been efforts in the past, but they need to continue in a more escalated way of including our traditional knowledge keepers, our wisdom holders in the area of protecting Mother Earth. I ran a sacred run that starts in Alaska and runs from Mexico, south of Mexico and Alaska. They run a sacred run under the prophecy of the eagle meeting the condor. So that is still being held every so often. We try to have it every 2 years, but sometimes it's every 4 years. But nevertheless, a sacred run is run on behalf of the prophecy for the eagle meeting the condor. And at the meeting point, there's always a spiritual ceremony. And that's a little bit, again, part of the call from you to open the door for Indigenous contribution to 2030 agenda. There's an element also, a third element that's happening just recently and is continuing on. There's another meeting coming up very shortly on the climate change discussions. I was present at COP21 in Paris to argue for the inclusion of the recognition of Indigenous rights in the Paris Agreement. But since then, there's been meetings, for example, in Bonn recently, where there's a platform being established to include and recognize the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, because the agreement itself calls for that to happen. So while we're not there yet, I'm encouraged personally by the efforts that are going on globally to ensure the inclusion of indigenous traditional knowledge in terms of climate change discussions that are happening. And I will take your advice to look at the Warriors of the Rainbow in terms of follow-up as well. Now in Bangladesh, I think the discussions that are really challenging us collectively today are the discussions on the resolution on the participation of indigenous peoples at the United Nations. And I was in a similar room to this. I don't think it was this exact room, but a very similar one, might be the next one over, when Bangladesh took the floor, actually, and argued, if I remember correctly, quite vigorously against the inclusion of indigenous peoples by saying that it should only be a state-only process. And there's no room in a state-only process for indigenous peoples. At the same time, we've got two other dimensions at play. Some say we don't have any indigenous peoples in our country, so it's not a problem for us. And on the other hand, others say we're all indigenous in our country, so this is not an issue for us. So you have these dimensions at play here, but I think the important thing for us is to continue our efforts, or double up our efforts, I would say, to ensuring that we can live out the right to participate in decision-making as indigenous peoples, tribes, and nations. Excuse me, thank you.
I don't know, Madam Chair, I can only just briefly comment on the environmental sort of impact on. We are of the view that this transformative impact of the declaration is yet to take effect. It's, I think for many stakeholders, sometimes they address the declaration with the view to just having its somehow cosmetic impact, just superficial, and to a certain extent public relation sort of benefit from it. And I think that's where we are of the view that very few have actually gone deeper into understanding that instruments. And I'm referring to that profound shift of paradigm that in our view has to be done in relation to what we know as environmental impact assessment, for instance. There is a growing view for a human right impact assessment. So a real shift from that traditional paradigm where we have been told X and Y projects have had an environmental impact assessment that have recommended X and Y measures. The major criticism to that old way of doing businesses being one of the main criticisms that actually when you look in who undertakes this environmental and social impact assessment, most of them really are focuses on the environmental issues, have no human rights of understanding, even though you might so there is a growing strong argument for a delinking of the environmental impact assessment from the human rights impact assessment, to have a standing alone human rights impact assessment where I believe those kind of long-term impact of certain certain action, including the contamination of water, of land, and other resources, can be looked into through a human rights lens of approaches, which pushes you to go beyond the current generation. The intergenerational aspect really have to come instead of just being focused on the lifetime of an investment. I entirely agree with Grand Chief that the declaration will also need to I wouldn't use the word education, but I think the government and other institutions, including, because sometimes it's, and we have written this in one of our report on political participation, engaging a state goes beyond engaging the member of governments, because the state is it has a complex composition. It includes member of parliament, the judiciary, how much have we engaged these other state institutions in relation to the declaration over the last years. So if we have to get that key instrument triggering the transformation it has to do at country level, it will require, to sensitize and raise the awareness among different stakeholders and other state institutions that may go as far as judges and lawyers and parliamentarian and national human rights commissions and some key actors. Those are two comments I wanted to make, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if the chair of the forum would like to add some remarks to this discussion.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vous remercie pour cet événement parallèle, ce panel, à l'occasion de cette journée. Vos exposés ont été brillants et je me réjouis d'avoir à cette table aussi bien un représentant d'un État africain. Comme nous le disons, l'Afrique reste un des continents qui reste à la traîne ou timide quant à la reconnaissance des peuples autochtones tout court, mais également à la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Et j'ai entendu un message dans les coulisses du sous-ministre des populations marginalisées du Botswana sur le chemin vers non seulement l'instauration de ce ministère, mais également la marche vers peut-être une terminologie, l'utilisation du concept de pas population marginalisée, mais peuple autochtone, donc pour ces populations marginalisées en Namibie. Donc c'est une bonne nouvelle et un bel exemple sur les continents africains. Je remercie aussi l'honorable Little Child de nous avoir retracé ces 40 années de lutte pour les droits des peuples autochtones, le chemin qui a été fait, et cela nous donne un espoir. Il nous dit qu'au début, il n'était pas pensable d'avoir les peuples autochtones dans un niveau aussi élevé que les Nations Unies. Et étant donné qu'il y a de l'espoir, pourquoi ne pas aller dans les échelons supérieurs? Pourquoi ne pas aspirer à plus, comme nous l'avions dit? Pourquoi pas le Conseil de sécurité? Donc, j'espère que dans les 10 prochaines années qui viennent, nous aurons ces niveaux d'accès à la participation aux prises de décision nous concernant à tous les lieux, à tous les niveaux des Nations Unies, qui reste aussi notre maison. Donc, c'est la maison de tous les peuples du monde. Concernant les interventions qui ont eu lieu, il est évident qu'il y a un savoir des peuples autochtones sur non pas seulement l'environnement, donc des connaissances établies, les territoires, l'environnement où vivent les peuples autochtones sont les mieux conservés au monde. Donc il est clair que nous avons les connaissances qu'il faut pour la préservation des peuples autochtones. Et il est inacceptable aujourd'hui que des peuples autochtones soient impactés par les effets délétères de la mauvaise gestion ou de l'inconscience environnementale de certaines parties. Donc, on a beaucoup à apprendre d'eux et il faut respecter leur environnement et leur vie tout simplement, parce que le cas qui a été rapporté ici témoigne directement de l'impact de la mauvaise gestion de l'environnement, du non-respect de l'environnement sur notre santé et donc sur notre survie et vie. Alors, concernant maintenant, mon commentaire principal, c'est sur la question qui nous a été adressée par mon frère du Bangladesh sur ce que l'instance permanente peut faire ou fait quand il y a des promesses politiques qui ne sont pas tenues par les États lors d'élections ou les promesses de façon générale. Malheureusement, l'instance permanente n'a pas un fouet coercif. Il y a la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Nous avons un mandat de conseiller. Nous sommes un organe subsidiaire aux Nations Unies, donc au Conseil économique et social des Nations Unies. Cependant, malgré cette limite-là, où nous donnons juste des conseils, nous usons d'autres moyens plus acceptables, plus politiquement acceptables par les États pour promouvoir les droits des peuples autochtones de façon générale, ce qui rentre directement dans notre mandat en tant qu'instance permanente des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Donc, c'est la demande de la subtilité de l'imagination. Mais par exemple, les experts de ce nouveau mandat qui a commencé cette année, nous avons trouvé une façon de promouvoir les droits des peuples autochtones, de tenir le maximum de rencontres qu'on puisse dans les États membres, donc au niveau des États. Donc cela sensibilise, mais cela apporte également ou crée un espace d'étroit dialogue entre nous, les experts et les représentants de ces gouvernements, mais également entre nous et les peuples autochtones sur le terrain directement pour qu'on entende les deux parties et qu'on exerce le rôle de médiation entre ces parties et qu'on promeuve les droits des peuples autochtones. Toutefois, par rapport à cette question, je pourrais vous... ça, c'est une réjouissance, c'est que mon collègue qui est ici, le président du mécanisme d'experts des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, ils ont reçu, grâce à leur mandat révisé expressement, le pouvoir de conseiller directement les États membres sur la façon de mettre en œuvre la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, qui est un outil, comme on l'a dit, le mieux adapté pour pouvoir rappeler les États membres de respecter leurs engagements et leurs promesses vis-à-vis des peuples autochtones. Il y a également la rapporteuse spéciale des Nations Unies sur les peuples autochtones qui peut directement s'adresser au gouvernement. Donc, c'était ça mon commentaire par rapport à cela. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much to the chairperson of the Permanent Forum. I see two more hands raised. Yes, ma'am, you at the back. Please introduce yourself.
Institute for Cultural Diversity, which defends the rights and cultures of the peoples of North Africa. I am also the representative of the International Federation of the Rock Art Research Organizations that interpret through archaeologists, anthropologists, scientists, the findings and the story of all humankind. We are learning more and more that the whole history that had been told from time immemorial since the written language, that there are huge errors in that story as it has developed based on some arrogant nation states' belief that they were the promoters of culture and that the rest of the peoples of the world, particularly in the southern hemisphere, were inferior to the Homo sapiens creature who looked more like the people of France and Spain, where the cave art, which was protected by the Ice Age from deterioration, became a big tourist attraction and also was admired because it is a very, very beautiful art form of imagery. Next week in Peru, in Cusco, Peru, there will be a second meeting of people who issued in Bolivia, in Cochabamba, a manifesto saying our story, the story of our people, may have been partly destroyed by the fact that in the southern hemisphere, climate was hot and the original materials for art making, image making on the rocks in the caves where our people practice their sacred religions have deteriorated, but nonetheless, science, as you say, is recovering that record. And we want that record to be respected by UNESCO and the United Nations. But unfortunately, much of what has gone on since the thrust of finding social justice for the indigenous people shifted from Geneva and the Human Rights Commission to a permanent forum where we only discuss and have no endgame, no way to bring this to international law to force the nation states to accept the dire straits that have made so many indigenous people suffer, and that family particularly. My heart goes out to you with your baby and your family that have had to drink that water in Flint, Michigan, and everybody should hang their head in shame at not being able to do anything about it. But I am urging you all not to neglect what one hand is doing and not know what the other hand is doing. I happen to be credentialed by Peace Action. I, for years, was horrified what had happened to the Japanese people when they dropped the bomb. I was 15. I'm now 87. And on July 7th, many people who fought for years and struggled to end the nuclear terror had a huge victory in the United Nations. They brought into being a treaty. 122 nations defied the most powerful states on the planet, United States, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, perhaps Iran, certainly Israel. 9 nuclear nations walked out of the conference, acted like it didn't happen, and put pressure on the African nations, the Arab nations, the Caribbean nations not to support the treaty. But 122 had the courage to say, we don't want any more nuclear weapons. And this is an indigenous issue because people forget that there were Indians downwind of Trinity when they first tested the atomic bomb. that they had tested by the French in the Marshall Islands and killed people through radiation poisoning. That this continues by power plants that are suggested with nuclear energy as the answer to the fossil-fueled man without safeguards for indigenous people whose land and waters are being destroyed. So I'm asking the indigenous people to support the treaty and get the word out, even though the media has totally ignored it. Read the Cochabamba resolution. It can be found on the internet. And keep fighting to possibly make a convention or treaty that will make international law out of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People so that real action can occur and social justice can finally prevail.
Thank you.
You have the floor, sir. Short, and if you can, questions or comments, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Rodolfo.
You have to speak into a mic so they can have interpretation.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for this. My name is Rodolfo Scanone. I'm a Venezuelan citizen, and I feel very fortunate to be here. I have to say that you're probably very familiar with the situation that my country is facing right now, but you are not familiar with the situation that indigenous people in my country is facing right now. Imagine if the general country is submerged in human rights violations, in a dictatorship government with humanitarian crisis of any kind. How can indigenous people in my country be? A year ago, before I came to the United States, I was able to visit several indigenous communities. And what I saw there was poverty. What I saw there was people who were feeding only on mangoes and whose education and rights were completely vanished. So how can we, as the international community, work for these groups that are, unfortunately, in countries that are not able to take care of their citizens? How can we protect indigenous peoples, for example, in Venezuela, whose government is not able to take care of them, or that the situation in the country enables them to be protected or to have their rights? How can the international community provide some sort of help to these communities? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now have the floor, Betty.
Thank you. My name is Gainhia Betty Lyons from the Onondaga Nation. I'm a very proud citizen of my nation, and I want to thank sincerely the Permanent Forum, first of all, the Secretariat's office, as they work tirelessly all the time to assist us in all of our convenings. So I can't thank you all enough. To Willie Littlechild, Chief, you always have such wisdom to impart on us all, and you sincerely moved me in your statement and your comments, and I want you to know that it radiated through the entire room. I would also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the member states that actually came today, few in numbers, and I think that speaks volumes. But it also speaks volumes in the fact of their willingness and their commitment to work together with us to see the full implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. To Mr. Broom, I wanted to make a couple of comments on the member states and some organizations on how they compartmentalize different aspects like healthcare, environment, our spirituality, and they like to stick them in these little boxes, and nothing is ever allowed to kind of touch or connect. And we as indigenous peoples, everything is connected. Everything touches absolutely everything else. And so I would invite you to question them on their value system. And perhaps they need to start questioning their own personal value system, those of the state that they live in, It's so important because ours is such a connected value system. It's just very different. To my sister, Claudia, I just, regarding the Condor and the Eagle, we've started the Continental Commission of Turtle Island with a few indigenous nations, and we invite all indigenous nations to join that. As we know, the Haudenosaunee, above all others, knows the strength and unity of our people. And I think that we need to really, as indigenous peoples, start working more collectively together on that, on all of these issues. You know, as indigenous peoples, it's our mandate to protect Mother Earth. There's only one. There isn't another one. We're not moving to Mars, right? We need to protect our water for everyone. And like, you know, this poor family from Flint, Michigan, this is happening all over the world. And our folks are dying from it. Indigenous peoples are dying all over the world protecting lands, waters, and our resources. We have to do that. And so the sooner that member states understand or have or create a value system for themselves, it's not going to change. What's important is how it's going to affect our children and their children and their children. I have my 2 sons here, and I think about their future and my grandchildren's future and my great-grandchildren's future. So, you know, you have to have a broader perspective. Lastly, what I would like to say is that the Haudenosaunee, our biggest hope is that we have a convention on the rights, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, so that it is law. It becomes law, and it's not just something that, you know, they can, member states can adhere to or not, depending on how they're feeling. You know, we definitely want to see that. As we all know, that all of this derives from the doctrine of discovery. And unfortunately, there are so many member states that still have that mentality. I don't know how to necessarily break down the walls, but I truly believe that once people get to know you, it's a lot harder to stay opposed. So I always try to just reach out our hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, I am going to give to the last comment from the floor is yours, sir. And then we're going to move back to the panel.
Am I on? Chibuzgua, Javier Tlaloc Enriquez, Chibcha, Mixteco, and Chicano. I just want to thank all this time. My start with this has been like around 10 years ago from locally, thanks to the Colorado Sisters, where I used to attend exterior events. And then I volunteered with DOSIP, with the Indigenous, the forum, and also with our organization. We've registered to become a part of all this, the Associated Indigenous Movements. And thank you gratefully to Miriam Masakisas, because it was a great process to get that involved. And thank you to the speakers, especially the last gentleman with a lot of emphasis on business, especially there was a lot of mention of nation states, and we can't deny that a lot of big organizations have become much bigger than nation states with regard to our part and our communications and challenges with Mitsubishi and their issues in Oaxaca and their windmills going up in Oaxaca. So I very much look forward to the next coming 10 years, and I do believe we have a long way to go, but I feel that this will become more expeditious in the future and much more advancing forward. There's a lot of issues we can all mention or whatnot, but for our survival, I believe we have to preserve our culture and our practices and our values and our healing ways, especially sun gazing. Sun gazing is very international in all cultures internationally. So I thank you all for your time. Tlasokamati.
Thank you. And thank you for the last comment being on such a positive note. I just want to ask if any of the member states want to take the floor. No? Okay, I hope we'll see you at the reception later on where you can have more discussions. We will now move back to the panel discussion. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and we already, excuse me, ma'am, because we have to finish at 6 o'clock because we have to release our interpreters. We're going to move back to the panel now because I think it's important that you hear from them what their comments are in terms of the discussions and the comments that they have heard. We will start first with the Honorable Minister. Please, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And let me thank my brothers and sisters. And I think all of us, being indigenous people, our concerns are almost similar, but from different countries. In Africa, we have got also the challenges of some of the things which were mentioned here. But my message to you is that let us stand together to fight a cause, and that cause is a very difficult one because different countries have got different approaches. But if we coordinate our efforts together, at the end of the day, we might come up with something which is fruitful to all of us. And let us maybe stand together also to thank the UN and to encourage them to support us at all times. With these few remarks, I thank you very much.
Thank you. And if we can have Grand Chief, if you would like to say something.
Yes, very, very quickly, thank you to all of those who took the floor and all of those present to share with us this important day. There were, of course, all of your messages important. I just wanted to, for me, take direction from this audience to guide our future work in terms of looking at the next decade. As they did in the Mayan calendar, they said goodbye to grandfather son, and they said good morning to baby son when the new calendar came. So as we say goodbye to the first decade and we welcome the new decade, the message I'm hearing from you, for example, is to seek from one corner the concern for ECOSOC, and UNESCO protection on your call for rock stories, the rock stories that are carried in the cave art about our culture. I think that's a very important initiative. To combine that with my sister's latest call, maybe by the next decade, we see a convention on the rights of indigenous peoples as a legally binding instrument. And I thank the young person for calling on the international community with the question on how can we help indigenous peoples in Venezuela, for example. And you did the job already by bringing awareness to the question. Raising it on the floor. And lastly, to acknowledge again the call for increased recognition of indigenous perspectives, that we're all connected, as was said, we're all related. So thank you for this opportunity, and a decade plan going forward is important. You know, actually, we had a meeting one time in Mexico, and we embarked on a decade for indigenous peoples. We just called a decade for indigenous peoples. And the UN came on board later on by acknowledging a decade for indigenous peoples. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to now look forward and find a way forward to bring out the remainder of our challenges, that we can do a collective effort to seeking resolution. So thank you to each of you. I really appreciate your participation and also the kind words that have been expressed. Hi, hi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to start by thanking all those who took the floor, showed interest in the discussion. I think it was a bruising experience to get the declaration adopted. It seems that it's another one to. There's been another one over the last 10 years and I don't think I would talk about sort of disappointed hopes, but I think the expectations were or have not fully been met. So it's somehow been another bruising experience, but I wouldn't call it a futile. And I see the point of the knowledge building on the declaration continuing. And I really like the point about the holistic understanding of indigenous people's rights, which within the expert mechanism, we're realizing gradually how these rights are interlinked and becoming really extremely sometimes difficult to do any legal analysis when you try to untangle all these different elements and wondering whether one study wouldn't become simply a copy and paste of the previous one because of raising the very same issues. And I think that building of that knowledge, we already have a good amount of it. That knowledge will have to continue being built so that different actors can feed on it, state will feed on it, private sector will have to feed on that knowledge. And one of my points I wanted to raise, I really think the next 10 years we need to broaden the spectrum of our audience. In most cases, we have been talking to ourselves over the last 10 years. I think it will be critical that we start talking to the non-traditional sort of actors. And my last point, Madam Chair, is in relation to the youth. And I think having Chief here and the young indigenous person intervening, it really gives the picture that the youth is taking on. And by joining this kind of meeting, the youth realizes how much effort was invested in having this framework, how many hurdles were to be overcome and how many obstacles were to be overcome to achieve. How do you make most out of such hard learned or hard gained? I think will be critical. So I salute the youth continuing engagement with UN processes, and I think that's where the hope for change for the next years lies. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much to the speakers for giving us these hopes of how we can actually move forward and make the next 10 years build on what we have achieved so far and actually make even more progress in terms of having the impact on indigenous peoples. We have come now to the close of the commemoration of this International Day this year. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Ambassador Liu, the Chairperson of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Ms. Dr. Mariam Walid Abubakrin, and Ms. Daniela Bass from the Division of Social Policy and Development for their participation at the first part. And I also wanted to give a special thank you to our colleagues from the Department of Public Information who are actually sitting here, to say thank you very much for co-organizing this event for us, with us, and making it such a success. And especially a very, very big thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here with us today, to listen to the comments, and I'm sure that even for those who have not taken the floor, you have much to reflect on in terms of where we have come so far and where we want to go. We have heard some very ambitious plans already, but I think it's very important, as Albert was pointing out, to have not just the voice of the elders, but also the youth who are engaged, activated, and definitely much more smarter than I am in how to use social media to get the message across. And I want to say that we're looking forward very much to having you continue to be with us. We very much count on the support of all of you. And of course, to say a special thank you to the member state representatives who have been with us here today, and that we count on you to continue supporting the work on Indigenous people's rights at the UN. I'd like to now, I actually want to take a minute to thank my team for actually putting this together, and thank you to all of them who are here. We're a very small team, but we do our best to just thank you very much to my team, to our team, for being here and organizing this. We'd like to invite you now to come and join us on the third floor behind here for some refreshments, and you will then have time to engage in more discussions on a one-to-one basis. I'm sorry that we could not include all the comments and questions that people had raised their hands on, but just to say that we do have limits. And finally, a very, very big thank you to our team of interpreters. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for helping us get the message across. And to our team who are helping us support this meeting. So thank you all very much. And please come and join us on the third floor at the back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Closed.